Dining Out for Life South Sound invites you to feast, celebrating Black-owned restaurants in the South Sound. Join us throughout the month of February to explore the flavors of a diaspora that stretches from Africa to the Caribbean and the American South. For a list of participating businesses, go to diningoutforlife.com/South Sound.
Hello, welcome. Welcome to our first event for National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, Black Bodies in Research. My name is Erica Crittenden, and I am the Prevention Team Lead here at PCAF. Before getting into it, because we only have an hour, I first wanted to take a brief moment of silence and reflection in honor of the lives that have been lost to both the COVID-19 and to HIV. If you'll join me for a brief 10-second pause. Thank you. We're here today to bring together leaders in the Black community and Black medical providers to have an open discussion about medical racism, historical trauma, and the impact that those two things have had on COVID-19 and HIV. So first, let's get right into it. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. John Push Gaines. Dr. Gaines is a former at-risk kid turned mentorship advocate. His message is all about pushing through adversity and defying the odds. Now, as a professional speaker and author, John strives to help and teach people to overcome and to rise. He's devoted himself to the world community. He has proudly appeared as a guest speaker at universities, corporations, nonprofit events, NBA skill camps, school assemblies, and youth camps across the country. As a graduate of East Central University, where he was named Outstanding Student in Business and won the football scholarship as captain of the football team, he is the picture of success. With a master's degree in business leadership and a doctorate in business administration, he demonstrates great dedication and personal achievement. He is driven to give hope to others because his own story grew from hopelessness. Welcome. Next, we have Nicholas Allen. Nicholas Allen is an infectious disease nurse practitioner currently working at Multicare Tacoma General Hospital. He has been working in infectious disease for 5 years, and a significant portion of his practice has been working with people living with HIV. He graduated from the University of Washington with a doctorate in nursing practice in 2016. He also sits on the board of directors of Pierce County AIDS Foundation. He currently lives in Tacoma with his wife, 15-month-old son, and 2 Labrador retrievers. Outside of work, he enjoys spending time with his family outdoors and can frequently be found fly fishing in the rivers of Western Washington and Puget Sound. Tamar Jackson is next. So Tamar Jackson is the Director of Community Engagement for Workforce Central. He is the leader of the County Community Engagement Task Force, an initiative powered by Workforce Central. He was born and raised in Tacoma, which spurs his passion to make Tacoma the best place to live. Tamar strives to solicit change through organizational leadership, while highlighting the voices of the community to achieve common goals. His focus is addressing challenges that may arise from workplace diversity, conflicting viewpoints, and workplace fairness. His concentrated efforts to direct transformation through civic participation, engagement, activism, and advocacy aims to create pathways for economic mobility for Pierce County families and individuals so that the invisible are seen, their voices are heard, their stories shared, their needs expressed and met, and their assets valued. Thanks. And then last we have Bisrat Abraham. Bisrat Abraham is an infectious disease physician who currently serves as Associate Director within Pfizer's Vaccine Clinical Research and Development Program. Dr. Abraham supports both the COVID-19 and Group B streptococcus vaccine programs. She provides medical and scientific expertise, and oversight for specific clinical trials and serves as a point of accountability for design, execution, monitoring, delivery, and report to ensure patient safety. Prior to working at Pfizer, Dr. Abraham served as the Director of Clinical Operations and Technical Assistance within the Bureau of HIV at the New York City Department of Health, where she oversaw training, technical assistance, and capacity building for providers serving people with HIV. She completed her MD-MPH training at Emory University, internal medicine residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and infectious disease fellowship at Weill Cornell Medical College, New York Presbyterian Hospital. She worked at the Center for Disease Control as an epidemic intelligence officer in the Division of Tuberculosis Elimination. It's a lot. Welcome, all of you. We're very excited to have you all here today for a much needed discussion. For the audience listening in, so we built in a 20-minute section at the end of the roundtable to ask questions. So pop those in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. So let's get into it. The first question I wanted to ask was really, well, one around mistrust and why that exists. This panel, we intentionally structured it to bring together leaders in the community and medical providers for a reason, and that's because of that mistrust that's there and very prevalent between these two communities. So I wanted to ask Tamar and John, your perspectives as community leaders. Can you talk about what's led to this mistrust? And for the rest of the panel, what the implications of that are on public health responses and responses to both HIV and COVID-19.
You want me to go first? I can go first.
Go ahead, brother.
When we talk about mistrust, I mean, to be honest with you, when's the last time something was made for Black people? When's the last time something was made from everyone else to our community to sit and say, this is made for you because we want to see you guys well? It doesn't happen. You know, it always seems that when something's made, instead of being for us to help us and make us better, we're the guinea pigs just to see if it's going to work and it ain't going to mess with anybody else. You know, I think our community is done with that. We're done being guinea pigs. We're done just grabbing stuff just to grab stuff. You know, we look at this vaccine. This vaccine was made in 6 months. We ain't never in life used the word pandemic. And in 6 months, we got a cure all of a sudden. We don't know which cure we're getting. Are we getting the one that Biden and Trump took? Are we getting the ones that these local leaders have taken? Or are we getting the one that we ain't sure how it's exactly supposed to work for the community, so they just have us out here in the community talking about we got something for you? It's never happened. So when we talk about mistrust, we talk about being at the table while certain things are being done and being made, not just because y'all got a degree and all of a sudden that degree says that you know what's best for our community. It's bringing those from our community so we can help you guys understand what's best for us.
Yep, and just to piggyback that, you touched on so many good points, and you could have stole the words right out of my mouth. I think when we talk about mistrust, I think we have to think of a historical context and really think about the history of why African American communities, speaking from just personal experience, why do African American communities have a mistrust with, especially when it comes to medical and testing? Hold on 1 second, please.
No, but what John is saying is real. Like, you have to look at the entire context, the entire history of it. I think a lot of people are aware, or I mean, I'm generalizing. A lot of people are aware about Tuskegee as one instance, but there's an entire history that came before that. One of the first presidents of the American Association of Medical Colleges, Marion Sims, experimented on Black women, Black slaves, and was dubbed the father of modern gynecology. And he experimented on them without any sort of pain medication because there was this belief that Black people didn't experience pain in the same way as white people did or do.
Yes, and so I wanted to talk about the Tuskegee experiment. That's a really good example. I think of my grandfather, who's 96 years old. He's still alive today. The last participant, I believe, that was part of that experiment passed away in like 2010. Right, that wasn't so long ago, and there's still offspring that is still alive today. And so we're not talking about something that happened 500, 400, this is recent, and it's still going on in the African American community. These are stories that we hear not from Google. Like, these are real personal lived experiences from our grandparents and parents that are sharing these stories with us, and that's why there's mistrust. And so that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thinking about Tuskegee, so a little bit of history lesson. Part of the rationale that was used for Tuskegee was that, again, this idea that Black people, disease manifests different amongst Black people, that for some reason, because we're two separate races, that we experience disease differently. So part of the rationale for that experiment was that the physicians leading it only believed that syphilis attacked the neurological system in white people. And because of that, it was justified to withhold treatment from 600 Black men, their wives, and their children. So, I mean, given all of that, and I guess that leads me to my next question, right? Given all of this history, all of the abuse that's happened and continues to happen, why should people take the vaccine in the first place? Why should the Black community take it? I mean, where's the benefit in that?
So can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So, it's very clear because of the history of abuses of Black and Brown communities in medical research, as you all have, commented, including the, famous Tuskegee syphilis study. There is tremendous mistrust in these communities, and that mistrust is now translating to mistrust over the vaccine development for COVID, as well as other vaccines. But I think one thing, to keep in mind is because of that history, policies, laws have been enacted to protect human subjects, people who are engaged in these clinical trials. So in the current day, I mean, that's just something people should be aware of to alleviate their fears. In the current day, there's a lot of, substantial oversight over the conduct of these clinical trials, including policies, procedures, engagement of what are called IRBs, institutional review boards, ethics committees. Everything has to go through multiple layers of approvals, all the way up to the regulators, which include the FDA as an example. So I think people need to be made aware of that. But I think in this situation with COVID, as I think most people are aware, there are substantial disparities in who's getting infected and who's dying of COVID, who's getting hospitalized and experiencing severe outcomes. And there are substantial disparities, and that burden is, felt most in minority, Black and Latino communities. So I think that's important to recognize. And the vaccine is, our primary tool at this point to help reverse the tide of this pandemic and to help reverse the disparities. Unfortunately, because there is so much vaccine hesitancy, mistrust of medical and public health institutions, that's a big issue right now. And we're already beginning to see, the disparity is going to be magnified. So if vaccine uptake is, most robust or mostly seen in Caucasian communities, which there are some reports of this in several jurisdictions, then we're going to have more disparities around this pandemic. And this happened with HIV. So, there's been a historical disparity in who's getting access to treatment and PrEP. And so this is nothing new. It has to do with our underlying social determinants of health, issues of racism, poverty. All of these things play out in disease outcomes and treatment access.
And Bizrat, when you talk about, the disparities and the access, you went back to HIV and the disparity even in our own Black communities. Magic Johnson had HIV. Magic Johnson is still alive. Broke people didn't have the cure. I mean, did he have the super cure? I mean, did he have the money to get that extra? Because I know we didn't have it. So when we talk about disparities and when we're saying a pandemic, the pandemic's not a shock. It's not, the disparities aren't a shock during a pandemic. They've been there. This now with the pandemic has highlighted that our Black communities, our BIPOC communities are at the bottom of the ranking. You sit and look at all these vaccines and you're watching the news. 800 people got a shot out of nowhere, weren't supposed to get one, but hey, our cooler went out. So everybody come up that can come up. It just happened to be, it's in one of them rich areas up in Seattle where they can get there and make things happen. You talk about vaccine sites. We don't have them in our communities. You're asking our grandparents because they want to look at people that are 65 and above for our grandparents to drive an hour to get somewhere that they usually would never go to. Hey, come to Eatonville, you can get a shot. Come down to Thurston County, you can get a shot. Where's the access for our grandparents right now in our own communities? So when we're talking about disparities and these vaccines, the trust is never going to be there. We are always going to be at the bottom. And if we're talking about how to flip this tide of this whole pandemic and the virus, we need access right here, right now. We need to be able to go down to our hospital that's on a bus line, that Uber can get us to, that one of our grandkids can get us to. It happens to be, most of them are off bus lines. So when it's like, hey, Black people aren't showing up, of course we're not showing up. We can't get to where you guys have this at. And then everybody's shocked. Oh, the Black community is just against it. No, we just don't have the access to do so. We don't have access like everybody else has access. And then they get shocked when we get mad. Like, man, we ain't even messing with y'all. We don't want to take this vaccine. We don't even want to bother with you guys right now. Why don't the Black community want to be down with us? Because this is for them. No, we get what's left.
And I think, Tamar, you bring up a very important, two important, barriers that are currently a big challenge. First, of course, there's the vaccine hesitancy issue. People just don't trust it. They think it was rushed. And I can address that in terms of, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there and people, really need to look at or have access to data and there needs to be a lot of work to disseminate that important information. I think the other issue, of course, is access. And there is a disparity in who's accessing, vaccines right now. Just to give you a story, my parents, my dad is a diabetic, he's 77, and he has been unable in Maryland, unable to access the vaccine. He's in the risk group that is most likely to have, severe outcome from this, virus. And, and with a daughter who's a doctor, I'm trying to search different places for him to be able to get the shot, but we have not been successful so far. So it's very frustrating. And I think, more work, and hopefully the new administration can address this, head on, but making sure we're getting vaccines into the communities that have suffered the most from this pandemic. I think that's, and I've heard some stories maybe in Washington, DC and other places where, they're trying to go into those communities that have had the highest, burden of COVID deaths and hospitalizations and trying to vaccinate people, more strategically. So that access issue is an ongoing problem at the moment and needs to be addressed.
Definitely. Nick, I wanted to ask, with your patients, how has medical mistrust, or how hasn't it played out in terms of, are your patients asking about the vaccine? Are you starting to have those conversations with folks? Right? Because I feel like people want it, as we're seeing, like medical mistrust is not everything. Like there are overwhelming amounts of Black folks who want this vaccine and aren't able to get access to it. Is that what you're seeing amongst your patients?
Access is, as far as my patient population goes, and the conversations I have with folks on a day-to-day basis, access seems to be the thing that mostly trumps, is the driving factor behind people not getting vaccinated. And that's just, it's a huge challenge, and it's something that we as a medical system, whether it's, the medical system as a baseline or this previous administration, it's something that we just have not done a great job on, but I do honestly feel like steps are being made to get better. And it's a big ask. It's a big ask to ask Black people to believe and to trust and to do whatever you can to get this vaccine, because of this generational trauma of racism, not just in the medical system, but in our country as a whole. And I think that a lot of it's not just involving research. I think that, whether it's Black people's symptoms being treated appropriately or access to care, I think that ongoing negative experiences with the healthcare system just contribute to this problem that we're having. Every person is an individual conversation, and I think one of the most important things that we can do from a healthcare side of things is to have these individual conversations with people and meet them where they are, and almost on a case-by-case basis figure out what is it that you need to know, what is it that you need to do in order to make this happen. Because I do find that for the vast majority of people, when you have the time to sit down and talk to them and really address fears and concerns and help find a way to access care, the vast majority of people are interested and will go through with either getting the vaccine or getting treatments. Mask wearing has been a little bit more of a challenge, but people want to get the vaccine. So,
Nick, following up what you said, think about the vaccine sites right now. The Black community, we relate to when we see those that look like us doing the things that we're being asked to do. Look at a vaccine site. Do you see Black doctors giving vaccines? Do you see Black nurses giving vaccines? Do you see the Black community talking and discussing to other Black members as they're questioning why I'm in this line? No, you see Black security guards. You see Black people wiping down some things. You see Black people standing there and guiding the streets. We don't relate to that. That's everyday life to us. Those are the low end pieces of anywhere we go. That's what we're going to be doing. So when you're talking about how the community is going to relate and want to believe in this stuff, how about we start looking for them doctors that look like us and them nurses that look like us and them professionals that look like us and have them on the scene? We always say it's hard to find somebody, but no, do we have the access to be in the same places the other white doctors and white nurses and white specialists are at? We're talking about how do we change this community, change the culture and that this community is looking at. And right now, we don't see anything that looks like us or identifies to us, but we're supposed to trust and accept those that have no clue what we go through in the first place.
Yeah, and also I want to add, Nick, you shared a good point about having these conversations. And I do think it's important to have these conversations right now. But what is the plan to have these conversations post-pandemic, right? And really let's continue to talk about, not just talk about solutions, but what are the action steps to ensure that some of these inequities and policies are changed in the future. And also, as we talk about misinformation, I believe in a mentorship model of exposure. So anytime I'm with young people and they have questions about certain things, I try to expose them to experts in that arena. So a couple weeks ago, this is a story that is very relevant to this conversation today. Uh, a legend, Hank Aaron, passed away, and a young person in one of these mentorship groups brought up the fact that he took the vaccine 3 weeks prior to him passing away. I don't know how accurate this is, but this is information that our young people, they're exposed to this information. This was a virtual room full of African-American males, all Black males. They said, well, he took the vaccine, that's why he passed away. Like, I don't have the research or the facts to address that, but there's a need to have Black medical professionals teach our young people the facts and the truths behind this conversation. One, because I don't know like who's all watching this platform, but it'd be interesting to see how many young folks are watching it. How do we invite young folks into this conversation to help change the narrative and help bring these young people into these conversations to help think of solutions?
Definitely. So to your point, John, and cycling back actually to what Tamar had talked about, the vaccine process being rushed. Bizra, I wanted to address that with you as someone who's been working on the Pfizer trial. What should community members know about the vaccine process and the vaccine itself?
Yeah, no, I can address that point because obviously it's something I've heard quite a bit, even from my own family members who are, very hesitant about taking the vaccine. And this is what I typically say. So, it was rushed because in some ways, rushed in a way that was appropriate. We have a major pandemic on our hands. This is, the pandemic of our lifetime, and it happens every 100 years. So, we have a pandemic, so we have to operate quickly. We have to rush the process, but no corners were cut. What happened really was, time and money and resources were allocated, infectious disease experts, people working in pharmaceutical companies, physicians, across the board, nurses, everybody within the healthcare system. And all of these systems came together, pharmacists, people were working around the clock. I can speak definitely for the New York City Department of Health and Pfizer, because I was working in both places during this pandemic. I transitioned midway, and people are just activated. Company resources, money, manpower, woman power, whatever, human power were dedicated to, to address the pandemic. So that's one thing that happened. We have all these people and all this money really put into one effort. Things happen, things move quickly. Also, the other thing I want to say, the technology for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, it's this mRNA platform you may have heard. It's not a new technology. It's been in development, at least for 10 years. Researchers have been working to develop this platform because it has the advantage of being able to be utilized in a quick manner to create a vaccine. So you take the genetic code of the virus, in this case COVID, the COVID virus, and you can plug it into this mRNA platform and produce a vaccine quickly. But that technology took time to develop. So we're just building up, we're using that technology. So it's not completely new in that regard. It's a system that's taken time to develop. The other thing is, one other strategy that was taken to expedite things, instead of working in sequence, folks, at least in the research vaccine development process, were doing things simultaneously, like in parallel. So at the beginning, Pfizer was looking at 4 different candidates for this vaccine. And whereas historically they may have looked at one, if it didn't work, they moved to the next, because they're working slowly, right? And then they moved to the next. This was a pandemic situation, so they had to work on all 4 at the same time. And if you have people, you have money, you have resources, you can do that. So that's what happened in this process. And the bureaucracy was cut. The review timelines, instead of, like typically when you send things to the FDA or other regulatory agencies, it takes weeks, months to get feedback. They would turn things around very quickly because people were working around the clock. So things moved very quickly. So no corners were cut, though. The same procedures were were implemented. So I just, I think that's one misinformation about things being rushed. And, as you know, or perhaps know, with Pfizer, they enrolled over 40,000 people in the trial. It's a very large phase 3 study, the same follow-up, the same, timelines. In fact, there's going to be more follow-up than the usual vaccine studies. With vaccines, we usually see adverse outcomes within the first month, really, after vaccination, but the follow-up is going to be even longer. So, they did everything in a rigorous manner. And I think people need to feel secure in knowing that.
Can I ask, because I've seen this image cycling around Facebook and Twitter and Instagram that, right, they were able to come up with this COVID vaccine in such a short amount of time, but we still don't have an HIV vaccine. So if either you or Nick could address why that is, specifically since we are here for National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a vaccinologist. I'm a, clinician primarily. But I can say that the HIV virus is a tricky virus. We've been working on it for decades, and developing a vaccine. It's something, there's a lot of research in this area. When you go to the HIV conferences, the annual conferences like CROI and, other conferences, this work is presented, but it's proven to be a very elusive virus in the way that it's structured. However, I don't know if this mRNA platform can be utilized for HIV. I can't speak to that, but I can say that we've learned a lot through this process, through addressing COVID. First of all, how quickly we can move when there's a pandemic, how things can get done more efficiently. We can telework, we can do more telehealth, to treat patients. So I think there are things we're learning as a result of this pandemic. But in terms of the vaccine process, I'm sure there will be lessons learned from COVID that can be applied to other vaccines, including HIV.
Great. So it's well known and evidenced that Black communities and other communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. What implications are there? What's at stake if one, vaccine uptake isn't taken in the Black community, and two, we don't have access to it? Again, we've talked about those are two separate things. Both need to happen at the same time, but what's at stake?
I think that by just looking at what's happening right now, it'll give us a very clear indication of what will continue to happen in the future. Black and brown people are going to continue to be affected more. And that difference is only going to become worse if the other communities are getting these vaccines. So, we will continue to see far worse outcomes, unfortunately. And then there is another issue that goes into kind of how research is done, and all of this mistrust that goes into medicine is that when you look at the research ability to enroll people of color, you have a lot of hesitancy to be in these studies. So it gets harder to enroll folks that we really need in these studies and need to be able to study and need to be able to say, hey, look, when we do these 40,000 person trials, we have 20-30% African American participants, which is we fell a little short of that in some of the vaccine trials we have now. But I think our willingness to participate even in the process of getting these drugs studied is also an unfortunate and dangerous side effect of what happens when we don't want to engage and when we can't engage, quite honestly.
Yeah, that's an ongoing issue, getting Black people to engage in clinical research for obvious reasons that we've discussed. There's a lot of hesitancy in the Pfizer trial. Just a fact. 9% of the study participants were Black, and about 24% were Hispanic or Latino. So that is pretty decent representation, but it could be better. It needs to approximate the population size. So that's, I do think more, people like myself, and my boss, for example, is a Black woman at Pfizer and is on a lot of the papers that have been published. So that's, the tide. We're trying to change the tide a little bit in terms of representation. Our chief medical officer has also recently announced a Black woman for Pfizer. So I think these conversations need to be had at higher levels, and there needs to be buy-in in leadership to address systemic racism, diversity, and inclusion. But I'm hearing more of that. Certainly when I was at the health department, we talked a lot about that in New York. And that was a big part of our work, is addressing, the issue of race and racism in our public health work. So it's a start.
Going back with what both Riza and Nicholas said. So we talk about the disparities in the Black community and what this looks like. A lot of members of the Black community aren't working virtually. They can't work virtually. So imagine if they don't have access to get that vaccine because we're not a priority. We are a priority if we're a test rat, but we're not a priority when we need to continue life and what's going on right now. So you take it a little further than that. You start getting these jobs saying you can't come to work unless you've gotten your vaccine shot. So now what are you going to do? Because either you're going to lose your lifestyle, you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your car, your way of living, because you don't have access to something that you're supposed to have access to live. Again, continuing the disparities in the BIPOC communities, period. A lot of people can work from home. But I ask you, when we say we're looking for, those ones to come in and do these clinical studies, how many professionals are in doing those studies? Is there a Nicholas in that room doing a study? Is there a Bizrat in that room doing a study? I guarantee you them white doctors ain't in there doing that study, but we looking for people that look like us to do a study because we come from poverty. So yeah, we're going to get this little bitty stipend, come back, come sleep here for a couple of days. We're going to throw you a couple $100 so you can be a test rat. But regardless on what, it doesn't matter who runs that rat race. At the end, they're all still just a rat. We don't have the degrees. We don't have the situation and the statuses that a lot of Black professionals have. But are they asking the Black professionals to sit in those rooms and be tested on? That's the problem. We talk about mistrust, but a lot of us, we can't even trust each other. Because I guarantee you, Nick ain't throwing himself in that room on a study that he ain't sure about. I know Bizrat, she feels okay with writing it up. And I'm proud of what you guys have done as Black members in our community. But they're not coming to you guys first. And the sad part is you guys are becoming the tokens of looking for us and gathering us to go sit in these rooms and continuing to be the Pied Pipers in communities. We don't see white folks coming at us and, hey, can you come take this? Hey, Nicholas, can you go ask your friends to come and take this test for us? Can they come in here and sit real quick? They would trust you. They relate to you more. How are they going to relate to Nick when Nick ain't even took that vial? Nick ain't even had that shot because he's on a different status than we're on. So when we say disparities, they're going to continue until the access and the equity and the diversity and the inclusion is meant for everybody. Not just for us to add numbers to boxes for you to check it to say that you figured out something and now we can go ahead and try our white colleagues and send it out to them as well.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. For what it's worth, I was the first at my organization to get the vaccine. And I have a pregnant wife who also got the vaccine. And we were very vocal about getting it. But, so we were one of the first. I think tokenism within Black profession, within the medical profession, can be a tricky thing. It definitely exists. It's a problem, I'm not denying that. But there is a component of our interests are aligned on this one. And we need to do whatever we can to help our communities. And if that means that we are the ones that are having that conversation, so be it. So I hear what you're saying. It's a tough position, but at this point, we have to do whatever we can to help.
Definitely.
Can I add one more thing? I think also the engagement of the community that we've had around HIV, I think that could be an important model that could be applied to other areas. I mean, just the engagement of community through formalized, community bodies like the Planning Council, the HIV prevention groups, and other community groups. I think that's something that, we can learn from. And ensuring that the community, truly the community has a voice in the conduct of this work and research.
Yeah, I just want, so I was vaccinated as well. However, I did sign up to be a part of the clinical trial for the AstraZeneca vaccine. I ended up going with, because this was in December, this was right around when Pfizer and Moderna had their emergency authorization approved. For me, well, one, I wanted an assurance that I would actually get the vaccine. And so that was my decision in waiting for my turn in line, because I didn't want to risk getting a placebo. So we have one more question that we want to get to, and then we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. Being that we are here for National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, I think all of this information is great for the Black community at large, but we know that Black people across the globe are disproportionately impacted by HIV. So I wanted to ask Nick and Bisrat what's important for people with HIV to know about the vaccine.
So, the data so far, which is still limited, we still need to collect more data and get more information. It seems to indicate that people with well-controlled HIV are at not an increased risk of poor outcomes from COVID, but those with a weakened, anyone with a weakened immune system, including people with HIV that may not be well controlled on medications, might have low CD4 and high viral loads. Those individuals are at risk for more severe. It's obvious that they would probably have more severe outcomes. So for that reason, it's really important that people living with HIV continue to take their medications, and that's particularly challenging in this COVID landscape, where people are afraid to leave their homes. And so this is where I think technologies like telehealth, prescription online delivery mechanisms, or online pharmacies, those have been super helpful. But in terms of the vaccine, the CDC issues guidelines for who should get vaccinated, and they are recommending people living with HIV get the vaccine. In a lot of the trials, both Moderna and Pfizer trials, people living with HIV were initially not a part of, were excluded, but then there was a change in the criteria, so then they were included. So that's very good news. Within the Pfizer trial, I believe 196 individuals living with HIV were included. And so those data will be coming out shortly, but so far the recommendation is all people living with HIV should get the vaccine. The other point to make is that the biggest risk factors for poor outcomes are really things like heart disease, chronic kidney disease, age, older age, smoking, and these, as our HIV positive population is aging, and maybe due to inflammation and other issues, they may have more of these comorbidities. So those are the risk factors that put people at higher risk of hospitalization and death. So I think that's important for those reasons also to get vaccinated.
Thanks. All right, so we're gonna open it up to the audience for any questions. Please feel free to enter those in the chat. Hello? Okay, so from Wilmer, I've heard people living with HIV were turned away from the COVID vaccine trials. Should HIV positive folks be concerned about the vaccine efficacy? And I think that was a bit of what you were hinting at, Bisrat.
Yeah, exactly. So, typically what they do with these vaccine trials is they try to get the healthiest population possible in the first phase of, the trials, just to ensure it works and that there aren't any complications that could be due to other underlying medical conditions. And then they expand, then they look at different subpopulations, they enroll different, So with this trial, that was the initial intention, but then, given the need to really think about, multiple groups of people, including those living with HIV, the enrollment criteria were changed, I believe in both trials, the Moderna and Pfizer, to include people living with HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C as well. As well as those other comorbidities, there were different phases of enrollment. So older people were included, people with, heart disease and any of those issues that might put them at higher risk. So there were multiple phases of enrollment. And then moving forward, there are other studies that are underway. For example, pregnant women, even though the CDC actually recommends, it's a discussion you have to have with your provider, but it wasn't an exclusion in terms of, vaccinating pregnant women. For example, if you're a healthcare worker and you're pregnant, you should absolutely, I personally would recommend, getting it. But we are doing a pregnancy study to look at, pregnancy outcomes, long-term, short-term, as well as young children, younger groups of children. We looked at up to 16, and then there was enrollment of 12-year-olds as well, up to 16, but even beyond that, 5 and up. So a pediatric trial is going to be starting soon. And immunocompromised, there was also a different category of people immunocompromised that we're going to be studying further.
Next, from Amanda. Nicholas, you said steps are being taken to improve access. Besides having conversations, what steps are being taken in this very moment to improve the access?
Speaking from the perspective of what's going on at Multicare, which I know a lot about, we are trying to figure out how to work with kind of our community partners and how to get folks vaccinated, not just that are our employees or our patients, but anyone that contracts with Multicare. And as far as expanding access, what we're really trying to do is to communicate electronically, which can be a problem, to give people, the opportunity to come in and get vaccinated. But it's working with kind of our skilled nursing facilities in our area and working with those community partners to try and figure out how we can coordinate or the different ways that we can coordinate getting those folks vaccinated. Our big problem right now is quantity and just having the numbers to really be able to get the vaccines out to the folks we need them to.
I mean, so DOH supposedly is in the process of looking at community events, pop-up events at churches and other places of worship. However, I don't know how far that's progressed, if this is something that, because people are dying every day, and it's an urgent situation. And so from my perspective, I've been on a few calls with Washington State DOH, and it's a slow process, and I mean, it needs to be urgent. I personally believe if there's a will, there's a way, and if like we really cared about people of color, BIPOC people, that it would be a priority, and there would be a pop-up event right now at a church on Hilltop, or in not these events that are happening at like the in Puyallup at the fairgrounds. We would be having these events tomorrow at places that are actually in the community on bus lines, like Tamara was saying. It's important that it's happening now. And the other thing is that even when those events are in places that are accessible culturally and geographically, that people are coming into our community, white folks are coming into our community to take that vaccine. And that's sort of further contributing to the disparities there. We had a comment come in on the private chat. Is there any negative health issues for people with HIV getting the vaccine? So would there be any negative consequences?
So again, based on the overall findings from the study, and I think also you have to think about the, benefit risk. You have to do an assessment, and I would recommend everybody talk to their own provider or physician to assess their risk of getting COVID, their work, what their work might be, what their comorbidities, their underlying medical conditions might be, versus, okay, this is a newer vaccine, and I think, in my opinion, of course, I'm a physician, so I'd recommend vaccination based on the data that we have currently. But I think each person, it's an individualized decision, and that has happened with your doctor. But the CDC's current guidelines say HIV positive people, should get vaccinated given the potential risks. And also one other point. More detailed information is coming in terms of specifically HIV positive individuals. But you should be reassured with the large trial that was done, there were very few serious adverse events, serious adverse events that came out of the vaccine, no deaths that we thought were associated with the vaccine, and really only 4 severe adverse events that this is based on a published paper that led to the authorization of the vaccine. But there were 4 serious adverse events, like lymphadenopathy, leg paresthesias, and that were thought to be related to the vaccine. So very few, and no deaths that were thought to be associated to the vaccine.
The next question, I appreciate hearing that mRNA is not new technology, but this is the first time it has been distributed to the masses. How are we certain about long-term effects? And I want to add a bit to that question. In terms of mRNA, I've been having conversations with folks about the technology itself, and I think there's also we need to take a step back and actually explain what mRNA is. And I just want to make that point, because I think just by saying, oh, it's an mRNA technology, and sort of explaining what mRNA is, but I do think that needs to be a point that's made.
So the idea between, yes, the mRNA technology, what it means is basically you're getting the genetic code for the virus in the form of this mRNA. You're injecting it into the individual with the idea that their cells, once it goes in, the mRNA enters their cells and makes a part of the virus, the protein spike. It makes a part of the virus. It's not the virus, though. It's just like a little piece of the surface of the virus. That triggers the immune system to create antibodies and to create a reaction or response. That's how vaccines work. You can put a killed virus or, attenuated if it's a live virus. This is not live, but you're creating, you're allowing the body to make a piece of the virus so that when the real virus comes into the body, now the immune system has antibodies, it recognizes it, and it can attack, and so you don't get infected. And that's the idea, behind the vaccine. So this is just one way of triggering the body's own immune system to react and attack the virus when it's presented in real life. And what was the other part of the question? That it's not a new technology?
Long-term effects, considering it is a new technology. Yeah. So, like I said, maybe I didn't mention this actually. So initially, the clinical trials, they look at, they enroll a lot of people, tens of thousands of people. They look at 2-month outcomes, 6-month outcomes, in this case, even 2-year outcomes. But really, once you make a recommendation based on those data, this looks like a safe and effective vaccine. We think it can address the pandemic. It should be rolled out to masses of people. Once it's scaled up to the public, you still need to track and monitor any serious adverse events. And so now millions of people have gotten it. And what happens when you expand to that level or that number of individuals, you start to see very rare outcomes that you may not have seen when you just had 40,000 people. But when you have like 10,000 people vaccinated, you might see rare, complications. So for example, anaphylaxis, severe allergic reaction, that's something that was not noted in the clinical trials, but once it was expanded to the UK and the US, we're now seeing more cases of anaphylaxis. So that's something that's being studied to see if, the mRNA platform causes more of those reactions. So the CDC, I have to say, they have a system called VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and other systems where they track all of these adverse events as the vaccine is scaled up. So, and if there's anything that's flagged as, concerning or serious, with anaphylaxis, it is serious, but then it led to recommendations that patients be observed for a little while after receiving the vaccine, and that we have medications like epinephrine and other things, EpiPens and things like that, available to address any potential reaction that might come up. And people have done well, even with severe reactions, once they're treated. Really informative, thank you. So we only have about 3 minutes left. I wish we could sit and continue this conversation. I know I've learned a lot. I want to thank all of our panelists, Isra, Nick, Tamara and John. Thank you for your perspectives and for chiming in. I think it's really important to have community members here having this discussion at the table alongside of people in medicine and medical research. So thank you. That's going to be it for our event today. Thanks for coming. There will be more events happening throughout the weekend centering National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, starting tomorrow at 11 a.m., which will be a virtual art gallery centering Black women and HIV. All of the links to those can be found on PCASH Facebook, or if you look us up on Instagram, PCASH_WA. All of the links are in our bio. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day and take care.
Dining Out for Life South Sound invites you to feast, celebrating Black-owned restaurants in the South Sound. Join us throughout the month of February to explore the flavors of a diaspora that stretches from Africa to the Caribbean and the American South. For a list of participating businesses, go to diningoutforlife.com/South Sound.